and welcome our new presenter, our next presenter, Dr. Rania Jabr, who will be delivering her presentation entitled, "Now that we are teaching students online, how will we assess them?" Dr. Rania, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for joining us, and we can't wait to hear your presentation.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. My name is Rania Jabr. I am a faculty member at the American University in Cairo, Egypt. I come from Jordan. I live and work in AUC in Egypt. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Shall I start?
Yeah, please go ahead. I think, yeah, we're on time. Yes, please.
Okay, lovely. Okay. So today I'm going to talk about how we need to start thinking of proper ways to assess our students. Yes, we are teaching online. Yes, we're doing a very good job with that. But also assessment is a very important point. When we're talking about assessment and how to assess students, we're talking about many different components. Why are we assessing them is a point to keep in mind. And what should we assess? We shouldn't assess everything. And how best to assess. Obviously, in assessment, there are many things. There is the assessment to place students at the beginning of a course or a term, assessment to make them, at the end of the term, to make them pass to the next level, to go on to a different class. But today, my focus is going to be on formative assessment, meaning assessment that takes place during the semester or during the course. First, what is the purpose of assessment? We want to make sure that the learning is moving forward and taking place in our classes, that the students are actually developing, making progress, digesting what we have been sharing with them. In addition, we want to assess the students to inform us, the teachers, that what we're doing is working, that what we're teaching is effective. I need to find out whether the students are understanding, are getting what I'm saying. If not, then obviously I need to start thinking of other things or other ways to make sure that they understand the material that's being shared. Moving along, I want to talk about certain very important features that we need to keep in mind when we are trying to assess our students. First of all, I'm going to go back to Bloom's taxonomy, and we cannot live without the fact that we rely on it. We've learned many ways to manipulate it in our teaching, in our learning, but for assessment, it has to also be brought to our attention that in assessment, we need to focus on this hierarchy. Currently, I cut the pyramids into two halves. Currently, unfortunately, assessment focuses only on the bottom part of the pyramid, the remembering, the understanding, a bit of application. However, what I'm trying to say today is that maybe we should focus a little bit more on the upper parts of the triangle, on the analysis, on the evaluation, on having students create. When we do so, I'm not saying don't assess their memory or their understanding, but I'm saying we need to also assess their analysis skills, their evaluative skills, their creative abilities, to get them to show their strength, to show off what they have learned. And I would like to recommend to colleagues to move, their assessment up, up the ladder, as we say. In addition to that, we need to think of the practicality of what we're doing when we're assessing students. Is it practical to give them this kind of assessment? What is the impact on them? Will it motivate them? That's the whole idea. We want to motivate them. Is it authentic? Is this what they're going to be doing in other classes, in other areas of learning? At university, I teach at university, in other courses at university. So these are many of the factors that we need to consider when we're selecting how we're going to assess students in our courses, during our courses. So I gave you a minute to read this. I mean, the value of assessment and the goal of assessment is not to give students bad grades. We don't want to demotivate them. We want them to learn, and we want to make sure that we are there to witness the learning as it happens. So basically, we don't want to give them low scores. We want to just accurately find out what they're able to do, find out what they are still unable to do to help them. So we're not in the business of giving bad grades. But also, having said that, I want to give a word of warning. We need to avoid a few things. We need to avoid the fact that our students are very intelligent, are very clever, and they are test-wise. They become test-wise over the years. They have become test-wise. They can get items right without actually knowing the right answer, simply because of a defect or a fault in the way we write our questions, the way we assess our students. It's not their mistake. I think partly we are to blame, or mainly we are to blame, because we're not writing better questions. So we need to take that into consideration. We have to think of what questions are we asking them. And of course, if students can Google the answers to the questions on the test, maybe these questions should not be there in the first place. Googling has a time and place, but when it comes to assessment, finding the easy way out by Googling an answer is not the best way to assess students. I love rubrics. I use rubrics in all my classes. I encourage my students to familiarize the rubric. I share it with them in class. I go over it many times during the semester for all the skills. And I use it as a guide. It guides me and it guides them also as to where they are on this continuum using this rubric. It validates what I'm saying, it supports what I'm saying, and it's a tool to engage the students. After many attempts, the students become so familiar with the rubric that they can self-assess. They can look at the rubric and compare what they've written, for example, and say, I haven't done this, I didn't do that, I should do this, I should do that. So it's a very good tool to engage the students so that they can engage in what we call self-assessment or assessment as learning. So today, as I said earlier, I am focusing on formative assessment, and the two main components in formative assessment are assessment for learning and assessment as learning. Assessment for learning is what the faculty member does as he or she tries to engage with the students, deliver the content, but also assess the students while they're learning. Assessment as learning refers to the students self-evaluating, self-assessing, which is a very important skill that a lot of teachers maybe ignore or don't give enough attention to. It is extremely valuable because it basically gives the responsibility to the learner. Especially now that we are online, maybe we should be trying to use more of that, the idea of the learners, giving chances to the learners to assess themselves. Am I able to do this? Have I achieved this? Can I write a 4-paragraph essay without, fragments and run-ons? Something as simple as that. So in formative assessment, there are 3 criteria or pillars that we need to take into consideration. The first one is our observations. We are with the students on a daily basis. Obviously, these days, we are on Zoom or on whatever platform, not face-to-face, but we can observe them as they learn, observe them as they integrate with us and interact, as they collaborate with each other. Give them tasks, give them products, see what they can produce, what they can't produce. If a student cannot finish in a given time, writing an essay or completing a reading assignment, obviously this is some indication. So the products of the tasks are also a very important factor that can enable us to assess our students. My observations as a teacher, who is participating, who is engaged, who comes to class prepared, is also part of this formative assessment process. And at the final part is the feedback conversations, having one-to-one individual conferences with our students where we share insights, in a positive way, in an encouraging way, to give them feedback, have a dialogue, a discussion with them, to tell them, you need to work on this area, you need to improve this section, I'm very proud of this, but you need to do that. As a person who engages in formative assessment, I've been doing that pre-COVID, obviously, but now with the COVID and now that we're online, the idea of formative assessment has come to the front and center. So some tips. I document everything. Every time a student participates, I document it. Every time a student submits an assignment, I document it. I have the data, the evidence to support the grade I'm going to give at the end, which is the grade in my formative assessment. You can call it teacher evaluation in some contexts, student participation in others, but I have data. I've collected evidence in many forms. Even something as simple as a tick or an X, doesn't have to be a numerical value. I allow students many opportunities to produce. So maybe today is a bad day for X, but tomorrow is a better day, or the next week is a better day. So they can have another opportunity to show me that they have mastered such skill, or mastered this learning outcome, or mastered whatever. I vary the tools to assess my students. And here is where technology comes in. I'm going to share in a few minutes, tech tools. I vary. I use a variety of tech tools. So maybe if some students doesn't fancy, Padlet or is shy, they maybe do better on Google Forms or Google Docs. And I also, when the students have relaxed and felt comfortable using a tool, I use the same tool, whether it's Google Docs or Google Slides, to do a variety of things, for collaborative activities, for individual work, for assessment. And again, I encourage students to reflect. I cannot even begin to tell you how important it is to encourage students to tell us how they felt, what they think of a task or an activity, or maybe how do they feel after they finish something. This reflection, even if it's oral, it could be written. Where I come from, in our context, we do a lot of written reflections, but also an oral reflection, a few words to share with us how they feel or how they perceive of the task. At the end of my talk, I will share some actual samples or some ideas. And again, I repeat, encourage students to self-assess. So what are the challenges? There are many challenges. Obviously, we are online. Obviously, the situation is not the norm where we're face-to-face, and unfortunately, students cheat. I cannot talk about assessment without mentioning the word cheating. And in many contexts, in many situations, cheating does happen, whether we like it or not, and unfortunately, students cheat. So they cheat, they plagiarize, and we need to, as educators, ask questions like, is it possible? Yes, of course it's possible, especially now we're not in the same room. The proctoring of exams is hard. Even the proctoring of tasks is hard. Does it matter whether the students cheat or not? Yes, it does, definitely. As educators, we're not supposed to allow that. And we're supposed to try to stop them from cheating. And, I always say that, in my training courses when I train colleagues about, teaching and assessment and tech tools, we should make it hard for them to cheat. When we create the task, there should be a built-in component where cheating is not possible, or at least very hard to do. And then some people would say, what about the honor code, the students' honor code, and trusting our students? I do appreciate all this. I trust my students. I mentioned the idea of the honor code, and I say you have my full trust until you give me evidence otherwise. And then you've lost my trust. So some suggestions to combat cheating while assessing students is, of course, the use of technology. Technology allows us to have multiple versions of the same test. You can have as many versions as you want. You can shuffle items on the test. You can shuffle passages on a test. Plus, tight timed quizzes, timed tasks, where there is not enough time for the students to, take a picture and send it on WhatsApp to his friend. Or, call each other on the phone or whatever, text each other, or use social media. A better tool is to encourage critical thinking. And then the cheating will be lesser because basically you're writing your own perspective on things, your own take on things. And this is where reflection is very important. It's my own personal take on things. So when I obviously copy or try to plagiarize, it'll be blatant, it'll be very clear. And my golden suggestion for the day, and I'm going to talk about it in a few minutes in more detail, is to give no tests as tests. So I want you to know your students very well. Yes, we honor them. Yes, there's an honor code. Yes, we trust them, but know them very well. When I know them very well, the minute something is an anomaly, it's obvious, Hura or Mona or Ahmed didn't write it, it brings an alarm bell. And please remember, students, when given the chance, will Google something. So try to avoid that. So I promised to talk about non-tests, which are actually tests. So, and how do we do that? These are some of the non-tests that I use. Open book tests, quizzes, projects, a video recording of a presentation or an audio recording of their interview that I asked them to do, a reflection. The bell ringers and exit slips are terms currently used in the literature to talk about basically, asking something of the students at the beginning of class or at the end of class. These are the mini micro writing samples that I get from the students once every 2 days, once a week. So I constantly have evidence of their ability and how their ability has improved, whether their ability has improved or not. Fresh evidence that they can make progress and they have made progress, or otherwise evidence that they haven't. So what I'm trying to say is using these tools, you can do bi-weekly, low stakes assignments, call them tasks, call them tests, call them quizzes, call them whatever, to get information about the students' progress and how they're doing. Another solution is to try things like presentations. I even do mini presentations, like 2 minute, 1 minute, 3 minute presentations. I give them case studies, and I have them to make decisions collaboratively, and they present it in a 1 minute, decision making. I'm testing their speaking, their interaction, their collaboration, things like projects, portfolios, polls, surveys, collaborative posters, infographics, or student-led teaching where the students are actually the teachers for the day, are many ways to, between quotes, test students while actually not testing them. The old idea of having a pen and paper and multiple choice tests, COVID or no COVID, isn't really not the 21st century way of assessing our students. So let me try to focus on something. The assessment I'm talking about has to be worthwhile, has to have value, has to impact the students, has to be a tool to move the students forward in their learning, not just to collect data and grades. So I need to think carefully before I choose one of these assessment tools I mentioned earlier, which skills I would like to assess. Is it reading? Is it writing? Is it integration of skills? Is it grammar? Is it vocab? Whatever skill I'm testing, I need to keep in mind to make my formative assessment worth it to them, that I allow the students to connect to self, the community, the world. Even if they're writing, tell me what you think, what your community says, what your society says, what your country says, what the world says. Even if it's a reading, even if it's a listening text. The other thing to make assessment worthwhile is to see whether the task is authentic or not, to try to mimic what happens in university level classes, for example, or in the real world. In the real world, in a job market, they will need to give a presentation. So I would definitely use this as an authentic task when I'm trying to assess my students. Does the assessment allow the students to share their voice, their opinion, their perspective? Reflection does, definitely, especially when you ask them, what did you think about that? How did you feel doing that? In another context, if you have to repeat this task, what would you do differently? So then the students feel that their voice is heard and they will be ready to share their opinions and the perspectives, and assessment would be worthwhile. And of course, give them choices. Even if it's the same subject, like for example, reading about social justice, I can still give students choice while assessing them. I can have a group do a poster if they want to. The other group can do a mini video or create a little presentation or do an interview. I'm still assessing their reading, or I'm still assessing their listening, or I'm still assessing whatever I'm trying to assess. But giving the choice and the variety goes a long way to making assessment worthwhile for our students. Now, as we approach the end of this presentation, I'm asking, can we go gradeless? Do we have to grade everything? Does assessment means always give a grade to the students? Actually, no, I don't think so, because not everything needs to be graded. What I mean by grades is a numerical value. I can basically give comments. I can give a tick. I can give, I don't know, for some classes, maybe for the younger students, you can give them maybe an emoji, a smiley emoji. Grades, numerical grades should not always be there. In fact, sometimes they can discourage our learners. Moving along, before I end this talk, I want to talk about the tools of technology. As I said before, we are online. We need to assess them online. And so these are some of the assessment tools that I would like to suggest. And basically, I'm not going to go through them. This is not the venue for that. But all of these tools are testing students without actually testing them. Things like Kahoot, for example. I mean, the other day I gave the students a Kahoot, experience. It was basically a grammar test. They didn't know that. They were having fun. They were collaborating. They were, there was a competition, and I basically got the grades I wanted at the end. As we approach the end of my presentation, I'm going to share with you a few samples of suggested ideas for quickly getting a snapshot of the students' abilities. For example, I love the minute paper. I've been doing it for years. It's nothing new, but I thought I'd also remind people, maybe some of you already know it, know how to use it, but basically it's a technique created by Charles Schwartz, and basically students are asked in a minute to answer 2 quick questions. At the end of class, we call it an exit ticket. What was the most important thing you learned? And what question remains unanswered? Very quickly, in a minute, I will have captured many, many things. I got the students to produce their feeling on a piece of paper or in a Word document or whatever. And I also got my information about how I'm going to proceed next class. Will I revisit this? Will I circle back later? No, it's a problem. I need to really spend more time on it. Or yes, I've done well and the students have gotten it. I need to move on. The second sample I want to talk about, and this is, of course, is a way to assess students, assessment for learning, and the students are assessing themselves, is assessment as learning. My sample 2 is, I call it the brain dump. Brain dump is all you know. And the students basically love it. But I have to be very careful when I use this. I use the brain dump at the start of a new module, a start of a new theme, a start of a new topic, okay? Or maybe to double check things at the end of the theme, at the end of the topic. Where I come from, we use modules. So I do this at the beginning or the end of the module. So I say, okay, you have 10 minutes, get out a piece of paper if we're in class. On Zoom, I say, okay, open up a new Word document, write your name, and please write down, timer starts, write down everything you know about this topic, this theme. The amount of data collected is unbelievable. A lot of data is collected. We gain insight into what they remember, what triggered something in them and caught their attention will be produced when they write this brain dump. And it gives me insights into something, into more information than if I say, okay, guys, tell me, what do you think of this orally?
And Dr. Rania, just a polite reminder, we have only 2 minutes left in the presentation time.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is assessment as learning and assessment of learning. My third sample is comment-only marking. As I said before, I'm not for a lot of grading and numbers, you know. I can just give a tick or a smiley face. I give encouraging words. I give a lot of feedback, a lot of written feedback. And so when I do that, the students also focus on the comments, on the suggestions, on the need to edit and improve, not on the grade itself. And from there, from these comments in mind, the students can rewrite, can take it to advisement what I told them, and I can also prepare the next class or the next part of the course. I say this is assessment for learning. The last sample is the muddiest point. I simply tell them, 1 minute, tell me 1 point of problem you still have, one item you still have problem with, and tell me why. You know, sometimes they're afraid to say it out loud. So I just tell you, write it down. Even you don't have to write down your name. Obviously on Zoom, they have to write down their names, or it's a shared Google Doc where they just type in and basically tell me what they don't understand. So in summary, I'm wrapping up. Our goal is to give a fair representation of students' learning. This is the goal of assessment. And our assessment has to match the learning outcomes. However, we need to use digital tools. We need to allow variety of these digital tools, and we need to allow the students to, we need to allow ourselves the chance to get multiple snapshots of the students' performance at different points in time to capture the progress they make and to allow us to rethink what we're teaching and also to rethink what activities are necessary to be tested. We can let go. I hope this was a quick snapshot of what my take on assessment for learning is, and thank you very much. I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rania. This was really informative, and it reflects actually on everything that's happening currently. We have a couple of questions, please, if you don't mind answering. For the different kind of assessments that you have mentioned. Now, if different students are to be judged or to be assessed in different methodology, like some of them would be doing a presentation, others would be doing a video, others would be writing an essay. Will this actually create a problem when we are saying like we're assessing all the students equally? Because, you know, this is one of the things about the quality assurance of the quality of the teaching and assessment, the fairness itself. Will this affect, in your opinion?
Actually, it doesn't. This is an excellent question because it often comes up. If you have a rubric that covers the commonalities among these things, like participation, like language use, like engagement, even things like being organized. So these are commonalities, or common factors that will cut across whether they're doing a video or doing a presentation or a poster or whatever. So the rubric doesn't have to be complicated. Maybe a 3-point rubric just ticks, yes, no, maybe, you know, and I share it with the students. And also, by the way, I forgot to say that when they do things like that, I have them vote on Google Forms for the best piece of work. You know, if I do groups of 4, I have 16 students. So they vote. So I get also the input of the students.
Oh, so thank you very much. Another question says like feedback takes time and to give regular feedback all the time is very difficult and time consuming for the instructor or the professor. So what are the suggestions on this? How can this be done?
Yeah, it's true. Feedback takes a lot of time, and I spend hours giving feedback. We all do, especially now that we're online. It takes longer, though. So what I do is I look at the common things I want to share with the students. So in class, during the class session, I cover those because these apply to everybody. And I have certain points that apply to Huda or Rania or Mona or John, and I basically keep these for very quick snapshots of feedback with the students on Zoom. So I ask the others to leave, I stay on and I call them one by one, or I go into a meeting room with each one of them and I give them individual focused feedback. So in addition to the general that applies to all, I will dedicate less time, but focused time to the others.
Very good. One last question, just to wrap this very interesting session, actually. When we are talking about assessment, we always talk about assessment from the professor point of view. What about peer assessment, student assessing other students? Do you think this is an effective way of assessment?
Very much so, very much so. And this was going to be another presentation or another time, because this is a huge area that's often underused, which is basically peer. I use it a lot for writing. Students have to peer assess and peer give each other feedback on every item of the essay they wrote. And I do it in stages. For example, today we wrote an essay. With the next day they peer assess on vocab. So it's focused peer assessment. The next day they peer assess on content, focus, and I give them questions, guiding questions. Or the rubric, I say, look at the rubric, here are the items of the rubric. Give feedback to each other, and then they rewrite. So peer assessment is a hugely important area for assessment. Yes, definitely.
Thank you very much.
Assessment as learning, yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rania. That was very interesting and fascinating. Please let me remind all of our attendees to take a few minutes to answer the short survey link that you can find on the chat box. And meanwhile, let me introduce our next presenter, Dr.